here with us is Sobi Sakib. And yeah, he's representing Sai, a layer 2 on Arbitrum. Woo, let's go! Focusing on gaming. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us today, Sobi.
Cool. Gaming is crypto's retail use case. Going to kind of walk through why I think that is. So one, I think the most important thing is if you look at the persona, like the user base of games, very young, technologically savvy crowd. These players are also used to virtual economies as is. It makes a lot of sense to turn these virtual worlds and virtual economies into, permissionless worlds that are also composable with the assets inside of them. I think, anecdotally at least, a lot of people that are into DeFi or into crypto nowadays have all mentioned, hey, I played RuneScape or I played a lot of Dota, a lot of League. So I think there's a lot of translation over in those groups. Furthermore, I'm looking at the slides. There is an interesting set of problems that I think blockchain gaming in particular solves. So one of these problems is with user-generated content, which has become this really big kind of subset of gaming and creation. Games like Roblox, for instance, they have user-generated games that have done really, really well. But this gets kind of complicated to figure out how do I actually reward creators when you start realizing how global the world is and how expensive certain transactions can be, right? Remittance globally is kind of an expensive thing. So there is this need for fast and secure transactions that the blockchain can provide. With regards to the user-generated content stuff, I think it's an interesting point in the sense that, honestly, all of Ethereum is really just user-generated content. That's what a dApp is in and of itself. And so for a game, if you have a lot of your logic like on-chain, someone can come and build a front end. That's the point of like make modding great again. Modding was this huge component of gaming it felt like a long time, and for the most part, it's died out. And I've thought about this a lot, like why is no one modding stuff anymore? And it's really because there's no way for people to make money off of it, like the actual developers or the publishers. And so this is kind of, maybe this is not that interesting. To me, it's a little interesting when you think about Uniswap or all these different bridges, how sometimes people interact with them with different front ends, and those front ends take their own fees and monetize that way. That's kind of the mental model I use for like modding in games, where if the logic is on chain, your graphical interface is just the front end. So if someone else comes and builds a different front end, they can get, they can make money from you just giving them a cut from like people using their front end, which is a system that can't really exist in Web 2. So this next one. But all of this stuff obviously has challenges. I think scaling is obviously still a big problem. Scaling in the sense of, you want to start putting things on-chain. The reason why I think pushing as much as you can on-chain is important, I'll give you like a bear case for gaming. If like crypto games have so much, if they have so much like incentives in them, they create such an incentive to cheat such that people won't figure out how to stop cheating. So an example of this could be like if you are playing like a shooting game, you can post like an attestation or like a proof saying that you ran like a anti-cheat software or something. So that there's ways to get beyond that, but I think the scaling stuff is there. And then the UX is pretty bad, I'd say for games. Imagine if you were go download a game and it's like, hey, you need to put these like 12 words or 14 words down, and if you don't, you're gonna lose everything. That can be really scary. I also say that the one thing in crypto that I really hate is when you have to connect your wallet to view a website. I've noticed things like that as well. So the UX has to be as good as Web 2. We've been working on a lot of actually obsessing over that aspect, because otherwise users just won't switch over. Like even if there's a bunch of different benefits, there was this, to give some context too, there was this moment in gaming where people were really complaining about downloading different launchers. Everyone was so spoiled on just using Steam. And when games like Fortnite and stuff, or EA games made you download your own client, like Origin, people were upset by it. So even the smallest amount of friction is actually really, really really upsets gamers. So that's a really important part to get the UX seamless as possible, gasless transactions, sponsored transactions, and then account abstraction, obviously. And then there's the regulatory side of it. I think that's something that's something that I think we need to have more grace with regards to game developers in crypto. Game development's pretty hard. It's basically like solving a bunch of technical problems while also trying to create something creative. And then when you throw in things like, securities and all of this other stuff like a Reg S offering and the associated legal fees that comes with that, it's kind of intense. And so that's something that I've, from our own journey, have developed a lot of empathy for our developers, because you have groups of people that are indie devs who are really passionate. Actually, it is a labor of love, and they're just trying to focus on their game, get users, build a community, and you kind of throw a whole wrench into everything. And everyone has their own different risk profiles, right, on like what to do, because ultimately you go talk to these lawyers and they're just going to kind of bill you a bunch of hours and you're not going to get any definitive answers on stuff. So that's something I think people don't realize how rough that can be. And it's adding a lot more money into the development budget, right? If a game is a $2 to $3 million budget, which is around kind of the average for an indie game, launching a token, listing a token, all the legal advice, setting up your foundation, that's probably going to run you another $500K to $1 million. So you're adding anywhere from like 33% to like 50% of the total budget in just legal costs, which sounds kind of crazy to say out loud now that I'm saying it. And then the last challenge too, I think, is like education. Gamers really hate NFTs for some reason. I mean, honestly, it's probably because Tezos did that whole campaign where they're like Ethereum NFTs are like killing the world with the polar bear and shit. It's done like a lot of damage. So that's something that we realized where I thought that was like a psyop, that people didn't actually care about that, but I've had that happen where we're talking to a Web2 game dev team and they're like, what's the economic footprint of your chain? I'm like, dude, there like isn't one. It's all good. So there's one aspect of the education around that. And then also, I think the most important part too is like the mechanism design for like tokenomics. So we've built a boot camp with Outlier Ventures just built around tokenomics, like explaining things like VE tokens or like fee tokens and stuff like that. I think there's a massive opportunity for legacy game devs to come in and like get super crypto pilled and then integrate that into their games. We're not seeing too much of that. You saw like DeFi Kingdoms and like Yield Valley and stuff, but those games are just DeFi farms with like gaming front ends. I think there still is a massive opportunity to do education around, hey, these are all the different things you can do with tokens, how you can make them composable. It just gets kind of silly when you're like trying to explain to someone how like wrapped curve tokens go, and you're saying like, oh, this is like convex VE curve wrap. But that I think is still an important part to like allow them to understand, hey, how composable can these things become? And so, yeah, we're working on a lot of this stuff. I'm not gonna like shill too hard actually, because I don't know if I like this slide that much. But a lot of the things that we've been doing has just been focused around user experience, and then also creating like really good partnership success, like adjacent things. So I mentioned the Outlier Ventures Tokenomics Bootcamp. That was all about, hey, like let us explain to you how tokenomics work, because that's actually something pretty difficult. The other thing is, figuring out a walletless experience, right? So we're working on things like Xi Connect, but there's also walletless experiences are kind of interesting. Because if everyone's using a different wallet provider, you actually create a really shitty UX where you have every game has its own account instead of having one like universal account. And so with Xi Connect, like if you, for your own stack as a developer, if you're using Privy or using Third Web or using Sequence, it doesn't matter. The way I think on the back end it works, it's like we have a smart contract wallet that's created, and then any other wallet that you use as a game can be a signer on that wallet. So it's very seamless, but you have a universal kind of profile across the stack. Okay, so I think what works is basically chains as a publisher. The gaming chains themselves or see themselves as a publisher, which means, like in traditional gaming, what do publishers do? Well, they solve a different subset of problems. So the problems that publishers usually solve are around user acquisition, development, marketing, a combination of those things. And so chains should really kind of focus on that, work really closely with the teams that you're working with and help them solve the problems. But there's obviously different problems to solve with Web3 games. Part of that is, hey, helping them with their tokenomics. I think I've been saying that word over and over again, but it's kind of, I think it's important. Also, really helping them with their go-to-market, If you've launched a token before or have done like a points campaign, there's probably a lot that you've learned on like adversarial selection and how to share those things. The other thing I think that works as well is obviously the Arbitrum tech stack. This kind of goes into the whole aspect of why education is so needed. A lot of game devs don't really know anything about crypto, even if they're building in the space, right? Because they're so busy building their game, they're not necessarily doing tons of research. And I think it's kind of up to us to explain to people, hey, I really dislike when people go, oh, no one cares if a website is hosted on Amazon Cloud or Google Cloud or whatever. That's because there's perfect substitutes that exist. Perfect substitutes do not exist in blockchains today, right? I think that is a really important part where the Orbit stack has definitely shown to be very scalable, customizable, and also most importantly reliable. And then tokens for user acquisition. I think that's actually a really important part too. It is my opinion that crypto gaming should kill free-to-play. It's a much better model than free-to-play. And we go to a lot of indie game shows, and I try not to scare the indie devs. So I just ask them questions hey, what are you working on? What's the most important thing for you right now? And time again, the answer to that question is always community. Community, community, community. And tokens are a great way to bootstrap community. It can also create a really toxic community because the second the price starts going down, everyone's kind of mean. So that's where I think that this last point of going all in on decentralization is super important. So there's different. So I don't even know what the word heuristic means, but I'm going to use that word. I think a heuristic that I have for decentralization is that a central party can easily extract value, but elects to not extract that value and gives it back to the different stakeholders in the ecosystem. To me, that's really important. Where, for instance, if you're going to do a token launch, give it to your community, right? I think over time, what I would like to see actually is us moving away from games raising venture funds via tokens, because you have a subset of the supply that is never going to be used in the game economy from VCs, right? If the typical amount of tokens that are going to VCs is anywhere from 15 to 25-ish%, once those tokens unlock, they're just hitting the exchange. They're not hitting the game at all, right? So I think that is something that is a blind spot for us where, I think it should be mostly equity fundraising, and then your token goes all to your community and players. And maybe if you have an infrastructure token, that's different, but I'm talking about in-game economies. I think going back onto the decentralization point, I think you have to just you have to play the long game, right? So there's tons of things that for instance, it's pretty easy to know what you need on a chain, right? Hey, I'm building a new chain. I need an AMM. I need an NFT marketplace. I need this, that, or the other thing. We've deliberately elected to not build some of those things in-house, even though they would probably generate revenue for us, to work with other people and have more contributors to the ecosystem. That I think is actually an interesting strategy as well, because you want to have some level of, I guess maybe legitimacy is the wrong word, neutrality, if you will, where people can feel hey, I can come build primitives here, and the team will be aligned with me. But yeah, the decentralization aspect is really, really important. I think that's where actually a lot of game stuff goes wrong. People are trying to be more extractive. So, for instance, we have an upcoming game that's fully on chain. We've been working on this thing for 2 years, and we launched the game as it's been being built as a Unity downloadable PC game, right? But the game's fully on chain, and we'll do more product marketing around this. But we basically created an on-chain game engine that has a standardized way to take smart contract outputs and display them in a way that won't confuse the user. That's just to say that it's really easy for you to build your own front end of the game. So I can go build a PW, a web app version of the game. I could build a mobile version of the game. And instead of us just doing that, we're going to probably do a small grants program where, hey, if you go build a mobile version of the game or a web app version of the game, we'll give you a grant. And in addition to that, we'll actually share some stuff from you from the front end, whatever transaction costs that we can pass through pending legal review. And so that's kind of an example of what I mean by going all in on decentralization, is understanding that you're making a long-term ecosystem that if you very kind of cohesively and deliberately understand the financial engineering of it all, and you elect to not kind of collect rents, if you will, and pass those on to the community. It creates this like very virtuous flywheel that can be used in a lot of different ways. And like the point I'll use to express that is, let's say you in crypto, right? Let's say that there's $50,000 that's going to like an LP pool, like someone's pulling some tokens, and then here's 50K in incentives. It's really not that much. That like really doesn't move the needle that much. It's probably cool if like the market cap is small or whatever. But let's say that you're using 50K for a gaming tournament, right? Or a prize pool in a gaming tournament, or incentives for creators. That goes pretty far. So like all capital is not created equal in the sense of how impactful it is. And I think we're just kind of scratching the tip of the surface with what does decentralized gaming really look like. And I hope that Zai can continue to help progress that kind of narrative and that industry forward. So that's really it. I'm done yapping now, and I'm done.